Welcome to the out-of-class assignment written tutorial. I've prepared this to help each of you create more successful written submissions. I'm using a classmate's example from Chapter 3. One of the first things you needed to do was identify the speaker, and the speaker's name was Dr. Randy Pausch. And you can see he has identified the speaker in the first paragraph. Another expectation was that the name of the speech would be identified, and the name of the speech was the last lecture. This too is identified in the first paragraph. The next thing you needed to do was identify the three concepts that you had to be working with. Those three concepts were ethos, logos, and pathos, and here they appear in the third paragraph. In addition to just listing or identifying the three terms, you needed to provide definitions. You could have chosen to use the textbook definitions, the ones that I shared with you during lecture, and that would have been fine. Going a step above and beyond would be taking those textbook definitions and paraphrasing them in your own words. And that is what this student did. Ethos is how personally credible we find a speaker. Also, ethos encompasses how charming, knowledgeable, and believable we find a speaker. Logos has more to do with how well a speaker proves the claims they make and the evidence they give for said claims. Lastly, pathos is simply a speaker appealing to a listener's emotions. Often pathos is used to persuade a listener without any facts or proof being provided. Once you've identified the three concepts, ethos, logos, and pathos, and you've provided definitions, you needed to do the last step, and that was to identify specific examples from the speech that demonstrate ethos, logos, and pathos. This is proof of your understanding. So if you take a look at the fifth paragraph, what I've highlighted in purple is this student's examples of ethos. He writes, and I'm only going to focus on what's in purple, Dr. Pausch's ethos is beyond compare. He displays great competence and knowledge on the subject he is speaking on, achieving childhood dreams, and shows this with examples of how he achieved his own dreams. He achieved his dream of being in zero gravity by taking part in a flight on NASA's Vomit Comet. He is a man of impeccable character. He seemed to truly want the audience to learn something from him. When he said that for him, helping others achieve their dreams was far more personally satisfying than attaining his own dreams, shows that he is truly interested in the needs of his listeners. Finally, Dr. Pausch's charisma. His use of humor, humility, and an overwhelming sense of positivity lends an air of charm, trustworthiness, and all-around likability. The fact that he exudes this overwhelming aura of charisma while facing his own mortality makes him seem like a truly exceptional human being. Then the student moved on to logos. Logos is a more straightforward concept, as you can see in red, and it moves into the explanation and then example. Listeners must ask the question, did Dr. Pausch use evidence to support his reasoning? And they continued. With every lesson that he tried to convey to his audience, Dr. Pausch had a correlating anecdote to support it. An excellent example of this is when he discusses perseverance. He uses his own story of attempting to become a Disney Imagineer to demonstrate the power of perseverance. In this story, Dr. Pausch explains that even after applying to Disney multiple times and being rejected, he still never gave up on his dream. Later, when an opportunity presented itself, He again tried and this time achieved his dream. Throughout his entire lecture, Dr. Pausch never failed to support his ideas with evidence from his own life experiences. The third concept was pathos, and this is the largest paragraph from this student. And he writes, pathos is the most difficult concept to cover because it has so many emotional nuances flowing through the last lecture. And then he moves into his specific examples. The most obvious incident of pathos influencing the listener is the fact that Dr. Pausch is dying. Even though he takes great care to ensure that his impending death is not the focus of his lecture, it is still looming in the back of the listeners' minds. Death may be the most emotional subject that any of us face in our lives, and it is very difficult to divorce ourselves from these emotions when viewing something like the last lecture. He tries to lighten the mood with humor. He explains his cancer diagnosis. He jokingly goes on to tell the audience that he wishes the university hadn't renamed the lecture he was giving. He joked how he had finally nailed the venue since it was called the last lecture, and it truly would be his last lecture. There were many other emotional moments that could sway the listener. From his story about meeting Tom Furness, which showed Dr. Pausch's humility, thus making him more relatable to the audience, to the stories and photos he shared of his parents, which brought up strong feelings of nostalgia and family bonds. For this student, the most heartbreaking segment of the speech was at the very end, when Dr. Pausch asked the audience if they had figured out what the second head fake was, and then he revealed that the last lecture wasn't for this audience at all, but for his children. If you find that writing in paragraphs and essay form is very, very challenging for you, I would suggest an alternative to the essay format, which is using tables. For example, you can convey the same information that appeared in that essay using a table. In the first box, I have the speaker's name. In the second box, I have the title of the speech. In the left-hand column, I have the three concepts, ethos, logos, and pathos, that you needed to identify. In the next column, to the right of each of those concepts, is space for a definition of each. To save space, I've only included the definition of pathos, but you get the idea. To the right of the definitions, I have left room for examples. And again, I've used your classmates' examples from the essays above, but you can see by just focusing on the table format, it's a much more concise way of communicating information. And the benefit of creating a table format is that if you leave something empty, you'll know that you have not completed part of the requirement. So in this case, we don't have a definition of pathos, and that's a problem. I hope that you have found this tutorial helpful, and I hope that it improves your comfort with the next upcoming writing assignment, and I hope it improves your success.